for all the men who were sent into the dark and told it was for their country, for all the things that were buried and called forgotten. The bus left Sofia at 4 in the morning, before the city had decided what it wanted to be. That was how Aaron Cole would later describe it, in the one conversation he permitted himself on the subject, years afterward, to a colleague he would ultimately ask to stop taking notes. The city hadn't decided, the old signs were down, the new ones hadn't gone up yet. The streets existed in a bureaucratic emptiness that felt, in the October dark, less like transition and more like erasure. Buildings stood stripped of their red stars, their facades pale and raw where the metal had been bolted for 40 years. Like skin where a scar has been removed and the new tissue hasn't yet learned what color to be. Aaron was 28 years old. He had been an army liaison officer for 4 years. He had been in Bulgaria for 6 weeks and had not yet learned to sleep through the particular silence of the country. A silence that had texture, that pressed against the windows at night like something patient and curious. He was told this was an advisory mission. He was told a lot of things. Major Farr didn't sit with the enlisted men. He occupied the front seats behind the driver, a heavy shape in the pre-dawn dark, his head visible above the seat back as a pale mass that didn't turn or move for the entire 4-hour journey north. He had briefed them in 12 minutes the previous afternoon. There was an excavation. There were reports of historical and cultural significance. Their presence was required for perimeter security and support. Questions were not invited, which Aaron had learned, in 6 weeks, was how Major Farr handled every question he didn't have the answer to. Tyler Marsh sat beside Aaron and slept almost immediately, his head dropping onto his own shoulder with the boneless ease of the very young. He was 22. He'd signed up because it seemed like the kind of decision that would make sense later. He smelled of cigarette smoke and the standard issue soap that lathered poorly and left something chemical on the lips. Aaron liked him despite this. He liked Marsh the way you like the only other person in a room who seems aware that something is wrong without being able to name it. Aaron did not sleep. He watched Bulgaria pass in the darkness outside the window and tried to organize what he knew. The operation had Bulgarian military involvement, 40 men, at least, waiting at the site. The Bulgarian government had authorized the excavation. They had brought in psychics, which was the detail that nobody in his chain of command would discuss with a straight face. And which was, Aaron had decided, the most important detail of all. You don't bring psychics to a dig site unless someone has run out of rational frameworks and is reaching for whatever remains. The bus moved east, then north, then onto roads that thinned and darkened, that shed their asphalt for packed earth, that wound through forest corridors where the trees came close enough to brush the windows, a sound like fingers trailing across glass, like something unhurried examining the vehicle's passage from outside. They arrived as the light was beginning, the thin gray provisional light of a Bulgarian October dawn that promised nothing and delivered less. The village of Tsarichina materialized from the morning mist in pieces, a roof line here, a garden wall there, a church whose bell tower stood against the pale sky like a raised finger. Aaron stepped off the bus and felt the ground. That was how he always phrased it, in his own mind. Not stepped onto the ground, felt it, as though the earth had done something when his boot made contact, as though contact had been noted. The village smelled of wood smoke and turned soil and something else beneath both of those, something mineral and cold and very old, like the interior of a cave that has not known air in a long time. He'd expected something that would put him on guard immediately, something triggering the animal alertness his training had sharpened. Instead, he felt a heaviness that was almost like warmth, almost like recognition, like arriving somewhere he hadn't known he was going but which had been expecting him regardless. He pressed this down. He was good at that. The excavation site was 300 meters beyond the village's northern edge, up a slope of dry grass and limestone, cordoned with rope and staked flags that snapped in the wind. The hole itself wasn't yet visible from the road. It was announced by the equipment around it, the excavator sitting dormant on its tracks, the portable lights not yet switched on, the mounds of displaced earth standing in rows like something ceremonial, and the other soldiers, 40 of them already present, arranged in postures of purposeless waiting, smoking, looking at the ground or the sky with the particular expression of men who have been given a location but not a reason. Aaron looked at their faces. He was trained to read faces. What he saw was not boredom. It was something presenting as boredom, wearing boredom's clothing. Underneath was the expression of men who had heard something they were pretending not to have heard. He shouldered his pack and walked toward them. The first week was digging, and that was all Aaron permitted himself to understand it as. The excavator broke the surface. The soldiers cleared what the excavator left. Major Farr walked the perimeter 3 times daily with a satellite phone and the expression of a man performing competence rather than possessing it. The ground resisted, not dramatically, not in ways that could be reported or noted in any official log, but subtly. The excavator's bucket came back with soil that seemed heavier than it should have been, compacted with a pressure that felt geological, as though whatever was below had been bearing down for a very long time. The soil itself was wrong in small ways. Its color shifted as they went deeper, from expected dark topsoil to reddish clay to, below 2 meters, a pale gray material that none of them recognized, finely grained and dry as ash, which made no sense given the water table and the proximity of the river. Marsh scooped some into his palm one morning and held it up to the light. "The hell is this?" he said, not to anyone in particular. No one answered, but several men turned to look, and there was a moment. Aaron felt it, felt the attention of the group gather, and then deliberately scatter, where all of them had the same thought, and none of them said it. The gray soil compacted under pressure into small nodules that bore, if you looked at them from certain angles and certain lights, a vague resemblance to fingers, to knuckles, to the articulated joints of a hand that had been buried open and had slowly, over centuries, been compressed into something almost but not quite featureless. Marsh let the soil fall back into the hole. Aaron had been the one shoveling that particular section 2 days before, in the early afternoon, and when his spade had broken the layer of gray material and turned it into the pile, he'd felt it against his wrists where his sleeves had ridden up. Warm, gently, persistently warm. The warmth of something recently alive, or the warmth of something that had never been alive in the way the word was meant but which had learned, over a very long time, how to approximate it. He said nothing. He was good at that too. The woman arrived on the 8th day. He didn't know her name at first. He would learn it was Irene, just Irene, offered without surname, the way certain people stop needing the second half of themselves. She came in a civilian car with government plates, accompanied by 2 officials in dark clothes whose body language suggested they had been told to facilitate her presence but not to respect it. She was perhaps 60, perhaps less. She had the quality of a woman who had stopped being any particular age and had become instead something more essential. Her hair was white and pulled back tightly. She wore a dark green coat too large for her, as though she had recently become smaller. She moved with the deliberateness of someone who has learned to be careful about where they put their weight. She didn't look at the hole immediately. She stood at the rope perimeter and looked at the soldiers, one by one, the way Aaron had looked at them on the first morning. A systematic attention that was not invasive so much as complete. The attention of someone reading a text they have encountered before in a different language, recognizing shapes they understand in a form they hadn't anticipated. Then she looked at Aaron, directly, for a long moment. He held her gaze. He was trained for that. She raised one hand, not to him, to the officials flanking her, and said something in a low voice. One of them wrote it down. That evening, Aaron watched Major Farr accept a folded piece of paper from one of those officials. He watched Farr read it. He watched Farr's jaw tighten by a fraction that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't been studying him for 4 years. The major looked up and found Aaron already watching. "Get some sleep, Cole," he said. Aaron went to his cot. He lay on his back with his eyes open in the dark of the military tent and listened to Marsh breathing beside him, and the wind working at the canvas walls, and the particular quality of silence from the direction of the hole, a silence with weight, a silence that pressed against the ears like deep water. He had felt it since the first morning, easy to explain away. The altitude, the cold, the strange psychology of an undefined mission in a country renegotiating its relationship with reality. He explained it away and lay in the dark and thought about the warm soil, and the shapes that were almost but not quite fingers, and the careful way Irene had looked at him as though she had come here specifically for that purpose and had now confirmed something she had been dreading to confirm. He thought, too, about the Crusaders. This was the thought that had been circling him since the briefing, the one he couldn't press down entirely. In 1096, the armies of the First Crusade had passed through this valley. History recorded their passage the way history records the passage of storms. Damage, direction, and little else. What they carried, what they encountered in the unmapped spaces between the world they knew and the world they were invading, what they chose to bury in this particular ground rather than carry further. History did not record this. History was, Aaron had come to believe, a document of deliberate forgetting. He fell asleep finally and dreamed of a door set in the earth with no visible lock and no visible handle, opening regardless. Marsh began changing on the 11th day. It was gradual enough that Aaron kept finding reasons not to name it. Marsh stopped sleeping soundly, then stopped sleeping at all, then stopped mentioning that he wasn't sleeping. He began picking at the skin around his fingernails until they bled, absently. Without apparent awareness, he was doing it. He started arriving at the site each morning before anyone else, standing at the rope perimeter looking down at the hole. And when Aaron asked him what he was looking at, Marsh said he didn't know. He said it without anxiety. That was the part Aaron couldn't explain away. The absence of anxiety. The calm. On the 14th day they hit stone. Not bedrock. A construction. A deliberate thing. Massive limestone blocks fitted together with a precision that the Bulgarian archaeologist flown in from Sofia stood over for 40 minutes without speaking. She identified the construction style as pre-medieval. Possibly Thracian in origin, possibly earlier. She used the word deliberately 3 times in 5 minutes, and Aaron understood that what she meant was this was meant to hold. Whatever was below the stone had been sealed there by people who knew what they were doing and understood that future generations would try to open it, and wanted to make opening it as difficult as possible. Major Farr ordered the excavator to proceed. The archaeologist left the site and did not return. That night, lying in the dark, Aaron heard it for the first time. A breath. Below him, below the thin mattress, below the cot and the tent floor and the Bulgarian earth. A breath. Long, slow, drawn inward over what seemed like minutes, held in some vast interior, then exhaled with the patience of something that had not needed to breathe quickly in a very long time and had not been inconvenienced by the wait. He lay completely still and listened to it happen twice more before he understood that the sound was not a sound in the ordinary sense, not air moving through lungs, but something his body was translating into breathe because breath was the closest category his nervous system had available. He did not mention this to Marsh. He was not sure Marsh would have heard him. Marsh was sitting up in his cot in the dark, very still, looking at the tent wall. Irene found Aaron alone 3 days later, at the eastern edge of the site where the limestone rubble from the demolished seal had been piled into low walls. The afternoon light was failing fast, the sky going the particular color of a bruise in the final stages of healing. She was holding a small glass jar half full of the gray ash soil, turning it in her hands. "You heard it," she said. Her English was careful, assembled with visible effort. "The breathing." He didn't ask how she knew. "Yes. It knows you heard it." She set the jar down on a limestone block and looked at him with the same complete attention she'd brought to the perimeter on the day she arrived. "It has been waiting a long time for someone to hear it." "It is very." She paused, turned a word over in her mouth before releasing it. "Pleased." "What is it?" She looked at the hole for a long moment. The floodlights had been switched on and their yellow-white glare threw the edges of the excavation into hard shadow. Something the Crusaders could not destroy, she said. Something they did not understand well enough to destroy. They brought it from the east, and they buried it here because they did not know what else to do with it, and because they believed that God would prevent it from being found. She paused. They were wrong about God. Wrong how? God is not interested in this particular ground. She picked up the jar again, looked at the gray soil inside it. Whatever made this valley holy to people before the Crusaders, before the Romans, before any of the empires that have used this land as a road, that thing is gone. What it left behind is like a house after the family leaves. Something else moves in. Aaron watched the hole. Below the broken limestone, the excavator had revealed what appeared to be a vertical shaft, narrow, precise, with walls that had been smoothed so deliberately they held the floodlight like a mirror. The shaft went down further than the lights could follow. My command should be told. Your command sent you here, Irene said, and the gentleness in her voice was worse than accusation. They already know what they believe this is. They believe it is a source of power. They believe if you understand a thing fully enough, you can use it. She looked at him again. Can I tell you something I have learned in my work? He said nothing. He understood she was going to tell him regardless. The things that have been here longest do not want to be used, she said. They want to be recognized, to be heard. You, she indicated him with a slight tilt of her head, are not the first soldier sent to do a job here, but you are the first one since they broke the stone who has actually listened. She closed her fingers around the jar. It will not forget that. Major Farr shut the operation down 2 days later, citing geological instability and budget reallocation, either of which Aaron believed. The satellite phone calls had become longer and more frequent. 2 men from the Bulgarian contingent had been quietly removed, not officially reassigned, simply absent one morning, their cots stripped and their names not mentioned. Marsh was one of them. Aaron learned this the way he learned most things that week, by noticing what was no longer present and not asking about it. He tried to find Irene before the convoy assembled. She was not at the site. The officials who had accompanied her didn't acknowledge his questions, which was its own answer. He loaded his pack onto the truck. He climbed in. He watched Tsarichina diminish through the rear window as the convoy descended the slope, the roof lines, the church tower, the pale vacant hillside above the village where the excavation had been, where the equipment already looked abandoned, permanent, like something that had always been there and always would be. The hole itself was not visible from the road. He had not seen it filled. The drive back to Sofia took 4 hours. Aaron sat in the truck bed with 4 other men, none of whom spoke. The Bulgarian countryside moved past them in the gray afternoon light, rolling, ancient, indifferent. He became aware, somewhere in the second hour, of a sound beneath the truck's engine noise, beneath the road noise and the wind noise and the deliberate silence the other men were producing. A breath. Long, slow, patient. He pressed his back against the truck wall and looked at the sky and understood, with the clean and terrible clarity of a man who has finally stopped explaining things away, that the sound had not stayed behind in the ground at Tsarichina. It had not stayed in the hole. It had followed the one who heard it, the way a thing waits a very long time to be acknowledged and does not, once acknowledged, allow you to simply walk away. His hands were on his knees. He turned them over and looked at his palms. Clean, ordinary. The palms of a 28-year-old American who had followed orders into a valley in northern Bulgaria and done what he was told and heard what he was not supposed to hear. He turned them back over. He did not look at what had changed on the backs of his hands. He was good at that. The excavation at Tsarichina was officially concluded in 1995. The site was covered and the records classified. No official explanation was ever issued. The hole, according to those who have visited the location since, has never been fully filled. Settling, the local authorities say. The ground keeps sinking. It has been sinking for 30 years. Tyler Marsh was discharged from service in 1994. His whereabouts after 1996 are not on record. Aaron Coles served 2 further tours before his honorable discharge in 1998. He lives in a town in the Pacific Northwest. His neighbors describe him as quiet and polite. They mention that he is always up before dawn, standing in his yard, very still, looking at nothing in particular. Irene was never formally identified in any government document related to the Tsarichina operation. Her name appears once, in the margin of a requisition form filed in October 1993. The handwriting does not match any military personnel assigned to the site. The breathing, if you are wondering, is regular, measured, patient beyond any ordinary reckoning. It has all the time it needs.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.